Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Calomir Samados, and I'm honored to welcome you to this special event in recognition of Women's Rights Month. This event is part of our ongoing efforts to create space for critical conversations about gender, equality, and the challenges women continue to face in today's world. Women's Rights Month is not just a time for reflection, it's a time for action. It's about uplifting voices, learning from one another, and equipping ourselves with the knowledge to advocate for meaningful change. Today, we are privileged to have with us a speaker whose work has been the forefront of feminist discourse and political analysis, Amanda Marcotte. Amanda is a renowned journalist, author, and feminist commentator whose writing has shaped discussions on gender, politics, and culture. Throughout her work with the Salon currently and previously the Slate and the Guardian, other major publications, she has tackled some of the most pressing issues of our time: reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and political extremism, and of course, the ever-evolving landscape of feminism in the digital age. The author of Troll Nation and It's a Jungle Out There, Amanda has fearlessly exposed the forces of working against gender equality and has provided a sharp, insightful analysis on how we can push forward together. Her work serves as a call to action, reminding us that advocacy and awareness must go hand in hand. Today's discussion will be a deep dive into the challenges and opportunities in the fight for women's rights, and I encourage all of you to actively engage, ask questions, and take away any ideas that inspire change. With that, please join me in welcoming Amanda Marcotte.
Alright, hi everybody, my name is Izzy. As Callie said, I'm part of She Speaks. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this discussion with Amanda, Nikita, in front of you all. So I'm first going to start with our first topic, which is what media's role is in shaping the public perception of women's rights in feminist reporting. So Amanda, of course, as Callie mentioned, you spent so many years navigating media spaces while covering really critical feminist issues. And it's really undeniable that the way the media presents feminist issues and women's rights, whether that's in traditional reporting, opinion writing, or other alternative spaces, it has a really heavy-hitting and direct impact on people's perception of feminism. And there's obviously like a notable tension between mainstream sources where, excuse that, where they may report really critical issues in a neutral way, but hit a really wide audience, where places like the Salon or more independent spaces may cover issues in a more heavy-hitting and radical way, but not reach as such a wide audience as other outlets. So I'd love to hear your take on how these different media sources influence the larger feminist movement, including the Salon.
Wow, that's a lot. So I would definitely say I've been doing this for, many years, 2 decades now. And in that time, it's changed a lot, and I'd say definitely for the better. When I started out during the Bush administration, honestly, feminism was not treated well, I think, in the mainstream media. There was still this first of all, the number of women in journalism, especially on cable news and stuff, was much smaller than it is now. And there was a tendency to treat feminists as harridans and shrill and treat the issues of women's equality as if they were already settled, and even though it was obviously not true, we still had, the gender pay gap, we still had, reproductive health issues and all these other things. And the internet, I think, changed that a lot, right away, in the aughts and, throughout the Obama administration, you had these websites like the one I work for now, Salon, places like Mother Jones that were pre-existing but had a strong online presence, but also the blogosphere, and social media. It was this place where feminists could actually speak out and say, no, actually, we're not like the stereotypes that you see in the mainstream media. And it gradually changed things. And now I think you go on cable news, or you open the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you just see, first of all, a lot more women. And you see these issues being taken seriously in a way they were not taken seriously 20 years ago. And I think it has had a dramatic impact. You see in polling data that people's attitudes on issues like sexual violence, sexual harassment, and reproductive rights have shifted pretty far to the left of what they were 20 years ago. So that's been my experience.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. The next thing that I'm really interested in, and we've talked a little bit about this when we had like our few Zoom meetings, but it's the fact that female journalists receive way more credibility attacks than male reporters. There's harassment, you're often dismissed for being too biased or crazy, and it's the fact that male reporters simply don't encounter this at the same scale. And I'm sure that you've experienced this firsthand. Yeah. So how do you see these dynamics playing out in the industry, and how has that shaped how you approach your work?
It probably shapes other people more, the fear. I might just have a risk-taking personality. It is real. It is definitely real. Like a lot of us don't talk about it very often because we don't want to make ourselves the story. That's not really the point of journalism. But I get harassed by the Proud Boys in particular quite a bit. They call me at home, they harass my partner at his place of work, things like that. I don't go on Twitter very much because I will literally get harassed on Twitter every day. And I've gotten threatening letters sent to me at my house a lot. A lot of these people are cowards, I feel, so I don't worry about it too much, but I think it can be very intimidating. I think it causes a lot of people to self-censor and be afraid of taking certain jobs, especially I think a lot of women particularly worry about getting into covering like national politics because they know that it escalates, especially in our current era where, the sitting president encourages violence and threats against critics. So I think there is fear there, but I really do want to underscore that people shouldn't be afraid because there's a lot of noise being made, but they don't act on it very often.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of ties into my next question is there is this aspect of fear which can hold people back, but also there are other times where women's voices are often sidelined or misconstrued or misrepresented in media. Have there been any times where you've experienced that? Or on the other hand, times where something that you've reported has actually aided in a big movement or has been praised?
Both. The sidelining is like subtle and constant, I'd say. Like, it's especially difficult when you're writing from from the left. I mostly do opinion journalism, but I come from a right-wing background, so I saw a lot of things that were I grew up in a right-wing environment. So I saw a lot of things that were coming down the pipe. Like I wrote a lot about how not exactly January 6th was going to happen, but that I could see this coming, right? And I think it becomes even easier for people to dismiss you as hysterical when you're a woman, especially since there's already suspicion around women writing about topics like this as opposed to writing about just gender or children or education or these traditional women's topics, right? So I've definitely experienced a lot of people disbelieving me until it's too late. But then on the flip side, I think that I've also been really fortunate. I just don't want to feel like I'm some victim here. I'm treated, after doing this work for a long time, I'm treated as a fairly respectable pundit. I get to go on TV and people listen to me, and it's such an honor. And I think there's more space especially if you do the work and you try to stick to the facts, and for women to actually get the kind of respect that they just didn't used to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I think this ties into also what I want to speak about is how digital media has just changed the game of reporting and perceptions overall. So on one hand, you have independent voices like you and feminist writers who have platforms, like you said, that wouldn't have been taken seriously decades ago. But on the other hand, we have algorithms and disinformation and harassment campaigns, which makes it really difficult to sustain a nuanced discussion around feminism. So where do you see digital platforms taking the feminist conversation next, and how can we sustain that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, obviously, I think a few years ago it was easier to be optimistic about these things. You saw things like the #MeToo movement that were elevating women's stories. You saw, the Black Lives Matter movement elevating stories of police violence that had been suppressed before. And I think that now, especially Elon Musk buying Twitter has basically decimated Twitter as a space for that. But I think that people are persevering. Some people are moving to blue sky or finding other avenues to speak out. And I really wish I had a crystal ball to say how this was all going to turn out. But I think what gives me optimism is I see a lot of people unwilling to just cede the internet to the far right and continuing to fight the good fight, even if it means rebuilding a lot of the infrastructure that's been lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel that. I have a lot of hope for how media could hopefully flip the narrative that is so prevalent in what we're seeing every single day. And I mean, speaking of that, I'd like to move into our next topic, which is about what does the future hold for women's rights post the 2024 election. So after the 2024 election, and even before it, women's rights were at the forefront of a lot of critical discussions. It was the center of a lot of major political and legal battles that happened and will continue to happen in the coming years. And the stakes feel incredibly high. I'm nervous. I know a lot of people are nervous and scared, especially activists, policymakers, journalists, and I feel that this time is more crucial than ever. So we've seen feminist activism adapt to different political landscapes before, whether that was through legal challenges, grassroots organizing, or even just media advocacy. So given where we are now, what strategies do you think would be most effective in fighting for feminist causes under the Trump administration?
There's a lot right there, but I think, first of all, I would ask people to think creatively, and that's easy to say and hard to do. But one of the things that we're at a tension point, right, where we have a would-be authoritarianist president. They've passed this abortion ban Supreme Court decision, and I think that one of the things I've really learned about authoritarian politics is that they work by trying to make the opposition feel like there's no hope, so just give up, right? And the way that you actually push back on that is to make them feel like actually there's nothing you're going to do that's going to make us go away or disappear or shut up or quit fighting. So also your own give up, no, there's no hope message back to them. And one really good example, I did an interview with Carol Jaffe and David Cohen. David actually lives here in Philadelphia. We're doing an event Saturday at Wooden Shoe about the way that after the Dobbs decision passed down, this entire sea of activists and abortion providers rose up to find a way to make sure that women who wanted abortions could get them, even if they had to travel, even if they had all these more obstacles in front of them. They booked flights for them, they booked hotels for them, they gave them rides. People drive women across country. And it's a really inspiring story because there's been a few women obviously that have fallen through the cracks, but by and large, most women who want an abortion in this country still get one way or another. And it's safe and it's mostly legal. And the thing that I like about that is it's not just about helping people, it's political activism. The reports coming from anti-abortion conferences is they're despondent. They can't believe that it didn't work. And I think that it's sending a message to them basically that no matter what laws you pass, no matter what kind of crackdown you put on people, they will fight back. You expect people to just fold over and give up, and it's not going to happen. And that in and of itself can be really powerful.
One thing that I keep thinking about is this whole idea of accountability, especially after the new administration has been elected in. And that no matter who's in power, the media plays a huge role in holding leaders accountable and making sure that people don't lose the hope and they don't wave the white flag. And holding leaders accountable for the policies and the rhetoric that impact social issues such as feminist issues. So what do you think that journalists and media outlets need to be doing right now to ensure that gender equality stays at the forefront of national conversation?
That's a really tough one, because I can tell you on the other side of it, working in media, like a huge part of the problem is that journalists and especially editors and publishers and whatever the variation of that is on radio and TV. I'm a writer, so I'm used to publishers and editors. But the decision makers, the gatekeepers, they are very focused on what the audience wants. And if they perceive that the audience doesn't care about these issues, then they will not cover these issues to the same extent. So I think that gives us all a lot of power to shape coverage because we can show interest, we can respond, we can give feedback. And I think, it's incumbent, however, on the media to not do what a lot of people in mainstream media are doing right now, which is overread the results of an election. Like, that election was a coin toss, and I think a lot of people in the press are treating it as if it was a landslide, and it's making them feel like there is no longer any interest in covering women's rights, racial justice, issues like that, and that's just simply not true. It's not like, it doesn't make sense that everybody in the country just suddenly changed their mind at once. So I think it would be nice for journalists to remember that, like, go ahead and keep looking at those voter tallies and realize half the country went one way and half the country went the other, just like they have every other election. Things have not actually changed that much in terms of public sentiment.
Yeah, that feels very refreshing to hear. Yeah. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nikita, who has a couple questions for you.
Thank you so much. For those who don't know me, my name is Nikita. I'm a part of Bridge TJU, and I'm also a community organizer with the Philly Liberation Center here in Philadelphia. And before I get into some of these questions about your work, I was really interested in what you said just now about how political activism kind of is the thing that pushes us forward, and as an organizer myself, I really live by the principle, don't agonize, organize. But I wanted to point to the recent crackdowns on free speech, because we see we've seen ever since Iraq and ever since Afghanistan, journalists are a target of war, both at home and abroad. We've seen a war on working class women, children, and journalists. And I just wanted to ask how that crackdown on free speech, with the recent arrests of student organizers both at Columbia and the abduction that just happened at Tufts University, how do you think that will impact the future of journalism? And is there a possibility of building a united front of activists, journalists, and just movement people in kind of building this resistance?
Yeah, that's that Tufts video, if you haven't seen it, is terrifying. And I would say that this could go one of two ways, truly. We don't know yet. I mean, obviously the Trump administration is hoping that by showily arresting protesters and journalists like this, that they will scare people into silence. But there's also the reality that sometimes when people see stuff like that, it makes them super mad and they just double down in response. I encourage the latter reaction and would point out that they can't get all of us. You know, there's a divide and conquer attitude that is coming into play with these kinds of actions. Like, in a weird way, by singling out one person, it's trying to send a message like, you don't want to be that one person and therefore you just be quiet. And that makes everybody kind of keep their head low and hope that they go for somebody else, right? But if you try to stand together, it becomes a lot harder for them to do that to you. Unfortunately, it does mean that you run the risk of being the one they single out and arrest. But, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I don't know what else to put you. Journalism is a dangerous job. It's not as dangerous as some of my colleagues would like to make it out to be, but it's not without its risks, and I wouldn't recommend doing it if you weren't willing to take some of them.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you so much, especially like as you pointed out, the way that people have organized so that women can keep getting abortions and access to reproductive care is the way that like I personally believe we must organize to continue to fight back for our rights in this like upcoming political period. And I want to like move into some of your writing. Part of your expertise has been on what you've dubbed the manosphere, which is the largely conservative male space on the internet. And I wanted to ask if you could kind of like go into that for the audience.
Yeah, I've been covering this for 2 decades now. It started off when I was first a blogger and kind of a new writer. That was when the manosphere first came on my radar. And at that time, it was mostly like middle-aged divorced men that were mad at their ex-wives. I'm not kidding. And it was just them having a lot of blogs about how, you know, family court was misandrist and whatnot. And now it's really drifted towards preying on younger men, a lot of it. So you have figures like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson who are playing, like, their grift, their hustle is sinister and really obvious to me, which is they go through the computer to tell young men that they're very ordinary problems that all people have. Like, no one's getting laid in high school, I'm sorry. Like, that is somehow like a big change and something's being taken from you, and the reason you can't get a date and you're 16 years old is because of feminism, and not, again, no one got a date when they were 16 years old. It's very hard to date when you're in high school. And, I mean, not no one, but, you know, I barely got dates in high school. I mean, it was normal. I think that, and unfortunately, there's an intimacy that the internet kind of creates between producers and the audience, especially like social media and people who are really good at manipulating it. So they're able to turn a lot of very ordinary concerns about being a young person, not just a young man, but a young person, period. Like, where am I going to get a job? Like, what's my future look like? Do I have any hope? And especially in our economy. And turn all of these anxieties towards a scapegoat, which is feminism.
Yeah, I find it like really fascinating how like even now like Andrew Tate has just been welcomed into this country after like being exposed for human trafficking and sex trafficking. And I'm sure like everyone's seen the videos online of like these new influencers, and they wake up at like 3 a.m. and they're like doing this whole man routine, but then you see at the end it's like a faceless woman who who feeds them and dresses them and takes care of them because they can't do it for themselves, but they act like they're this alpha man. And I wanted to ask you like about that sort of mentality we're seeing in young men, because we're seeing like overwhelmingly women moving more towards the left, outside of like, I guess, this pocket of trad wife influencers. But we have been seeing like young men grow more and more conservative. So I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about this gap that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a piece in the New York Times today, and I'm blanking on the writer. He's a sociologist who's been doing research on this, and it was really interesting because his research actually showed that while young men broke largely for Donald Trump, I mean, all demographics moved towards Trump. It was just young men especially so. The data shows that young men are actually not more conservative. That's what I think is so fascinating. When you actually drill down on policy issues, they're not anti-gay, they're not anti-free speech, they tend to be economically liberal. They, like, when you're actually asking about their policy views, they should be Democrats. So I think that's what makes this manosphere stuff even more insidious, because it's sort of separated your voting choices from policy and politics entirely. It's all about, how much do you lift, bro? And it's scary because it's all just vibes. And I really wish I had an answer for how to fix that. Maybe, giving the like hard slap of reality of what bad policy actually means for your life might make a difference. But I think part of the problem is that we have this like huge propaganda machine all day long telling young men that they're being oppressed, and that the way to fight that is to vote for Donald Trump without actually in any way, because they know that it would undermine their message, telling them that that vote is for a series of policies that they do not want.
Yeah, it's like, I agree with that. It's so shameful, like just the vibes only politics that like people are falling into. And I wanted to ask, like, what do you think we can expect over the next 4 years under this Trump administration? Like, do you think people are going to fall out of that hole?
It's interesting. I hope so. I think we need to separate there's categories of voters. There's people that are like fully identify with a party, and odds are they will never ever change. And that's true on both sides of the aisle. Decades of political science research shows this. We don't have a lot of people that switch. Once something's become your identity, it's basically it. But there is a significant amount of evidence that there were a lot of people that voted what I call voting lightly. They didn't think about it too hard. They were angry about inflation. Trump has become normalized over the past decade, so that like a lot of the things that made people who were vibes voters dislike him before, like he's just normal now, so I think it was a little easier to vote for him. And I think that those folks might swing the other direction, especially, just like in 2020, the COVID pandemic, I think caused a lot of people to realize we need to vote in a way that's going to get us out of this. And Trump's, if nothing else, in passing all these tariffs and unleashing Elon Musk in a way that he's going to do serious damage to people's like daily life, daily well-being. I mean, I don't know how much y'all have been following. People aren't getting their Social Security checks. That's dangerous and scary, and people are going to notice that stuff. So I do hope that makes a difference. But it's only going to make a difference on that like small group of swing voters.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. My last question for you is just like, and you've talked about this a little bit earlier, but I guess how can we acknowledge the concerns of the manosphere and like this pipeline of young men falling into conservatism, and also like again I want to point to the trad wife concept online, and you've written. You just wrote an article yesterday that was released about the Make America Healthy moms. Yeah, like how do we acknowledge that without pushing more people into that, like sort of toxic masculinity and also like, I guess toxic hyper femininity. Yeah.
I think part of it is acknowledging people's so conspiracy theorists and disinformation people, peddlers, they prey on people's legitimate fears and concerns, and then they give them a fake answer. And, Robert F. Kennedy with this Make America Healthy Again thing is doing a variation of that. It is true that Americans still struggle to get good health care despite Obamacare, despite all the efforts to make our health insurance system better. It's just they keep falling short, and so it's very difficult for a lot of people to get health care. And so they become, I think, vulnerable to pitches online that all they need to do is take this supplement or reject the mainstream media's view of what is legitimate healthcare, which is hard and expensive and kind of sometimes demoralizing. Going to a doctor is not a great time. So we can acknowledge that, but then say, like, this isn't actually the answer. And try to speak to people on that. I think similarly with the manosphere, is a lot of grifters preying on young men's legitimate feelings of loneliness and fear that we all experience, and I think have grown worse since the pandemic in a lot of ways. But it's really important for young men to understand what they're selling is just going to make it worse. And in a lot of ways, they're hoping it makes it worse so that you stay addicted to their content, right? The incel that's like watching a bunch of like videos about how to pick up girls is going to stop watching those videos if he actually gets a girlfriend, right? So it's not in their interest for you to be successful. So they're feeding you a bunch of lies, and they're telling you to adopt behaviors that are going to make all your problems worse. And so I think we can acknowledge it and then hopefully get people to see that like the snake oil they're buying is just going to make their problems worse.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Callie to give us some audience questions.
I'll stand over here. All right. So one of the questions we got was, given the recent security breach where a journalist was accidentally added to a group chat exposing war plans, what are your thoughts on the implications of that mistake? And secondly, how do you think that this incident will impact the media landscape? Do you anticipate an even stronger push for the Trump administration to then suppress opposing viewpoints like they already have, with calling it fake news and nobody reads The Atlantic anyway and stuff like that?
Yeah, they're going to speak their lies. This is a really good example, though, of what we were talking about earlier about the importance of solidarity, because they're trying to single out Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic and abuse him. And if that was successful, if people started to like scooch away from him and act like what he did was somehow shady or wrong, then he would become a much easier target for them to do something even worse to, right? But instead what we're seeing, because Jeffrey is a like very prominent, powerful journalist, he's the executive editor of The Atlantic, he's a well-connected guy, he's getting a lot of defense. Like everyone on cable news is defending him, like every mainstream media outlet, everybody, like, and then also on the left, and to a certain extent even on the right, journalists are defending him because he didn't do anything wrong. And I think that that is making it a lot harder for the Trump administration to do anything to him. He's basically being protected. And we just need to take that mentality and extend that to everybody in the field. And that, I think, would do a lot to keep them from doing things like arresting that tough student. She was picked because she was vulnerable. But these kind of powers always escalate. And it is true that Donald Trump would love to take out Jeffrey Goldberg. But right now, he definitely does not perceive that he has the political will to do that.
We're not using it. Fist bump, American flag, fire, revolution, right? So the next one was, what should be the response to new legislative initiatives of the new administration, like the deconstruction of the Department of Education and other things like USDA and all the firings of, what was the other one they said? They said,
Federal workers.
The federal workers, thank you. Yeah, that's the question.
This is a tough one because it is true that it's especially when the Trump administration is just doing so much damage on every front all at once as quickly as they can. It's very hard to get people. Getting people to rally is usually around like one point, right? Unfortunately, like something like USAID is in a lot of trouble because there's not a lot of political will to defend them, even though if you start to look into what USAID does, I mean, it's a really important organization that buys us a lot for very little money. But there wasn't a lot of political will to rally around it, which is why they went after it first. But I think with the Department of Education and Social Security, you're going to start seeing, I think, flashpoints where people are going to be willing to organize because it affects them. And I saw this in my reporting around the Moms for Liberty situation. So Moms for Liberty was this group that was started right after Biden got elected. It was a right-wing AstroTurf group that claimed to be grassroots moms, but it was well-financed and it was all Republican activists. But their strategy was to go get elected on school boards and start making fights over LGBTQ rights and Black Lives Matter and censoring books in the library, kind of flashpoints and just bring the culture war to their like local communities in hopes of, I think, demoralizing the left. And it had the opposite effect. It caused a lot of people that were sitting on the sidelines to get off the sidelines. And I interviewed a lot of parents out in Bucks County who I think were just sort of doing their job and living their life. You know, they voted, they maybe donated a little. And this, having Moms for Liberty come into their school district to take over their school board and start banning books and harassing queer kids, like galvanized these parents, and they organized. A lot of them ran for office for the first time, and they took the school board back. So I think that when people feel like it's coming for their family, for their community, they will often fight back, and that's an opportunity for any organizer. It's just real politics, unfortunately. I wish that there was more people who were like hitting the streets for USA, but I think especially in the amount of time that people trying to organize a response have, which is very little, that wasn't going to happen. But the education department, like they might ruin Pell Grants and Stafford loans, like with this. So people need to pay attention and treat this as a real organizing opportunity.
So the next question is, do you think that the narrative of liberal mainstream media has inspired a conservative takeover of the internet?
I'm sorry.
That was on this is fresh from the audience. But so it's, yeah, do you think that the narrative of liberal mainstream media has inspired a conservative takeover of the internet?
Yes, and in a way that is what's interesting about it is I think that the organizing principle of the right now is just conspiracy theory. It's a lot of crazy ideas. And I think that it becomes like the liberal media is this like easy flashpoint phrase that gets tossed around, but when you dig like even an inch deeper past it, you find, well, just literally anything Elon Musk is saying on Twitter, like it's accusing people of conspiring, it's accusing people of having all these like ulterior motives, it's accusing us of all being paid by George Soros. There's a lot of like weird anti-Semitism in it, and I think that what you find is that the liberal media is kind of the like curtain that they pull back, and then what they're trying to sort of lure people into is this conspiracy theory thinking, because there's a recognition on the right that once people fall down that rabbit hole, it's very difficult to get them out of it. It's very intoxicating to like believe in conspiracy theories. So in a sense, it is true that a vague sense that the liberal media is against you is like the bait, but the hook is bad, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so with that, as a person working within media, do you believe that the current media is due for a change?
I mean, always. There's always a lot of stuff that can be changed. I think that the mainstream media's tendency to veer towards centrism, and both sides do it, and those kind of tendencies were annoying in the past, they're fatal now. Like, the problem, like, when you look at the New York Times opinion page, for instance, you get, especially in the past 4 years, you would get a liberal op-ed, and then a counterbalance one from like someone like Pamela Paul or something that was like, but the real issue is trans kids. And you're like, is it though, or is it rising fascism, right? And I think that kind of false equivalence and this sort of, it's almost wish casting that we could go back to some era when like politics was just these minor policy disagreements, but at the end of the day we could all have beer together, it's fine. I think that was an illusion that was never actually true, but it's definitely not true now. So I think the mainstream outlets could think more clearly about who they need to realize that it's time to pick a side, because the authoritarian forces do not support us. That said, I think that those people have lost a lot of power in the conversation, and we're seeing a lot more social media, alternative channels of information that are where most people are actually getting their news these days. And that is being so over-dominated by conservative voices and conspiratorial ones, places like the Daily Wire, Steve Bannon's podcast, Joe Rogan. I mean, those places just, they're doing mass around the New York Times in terms of audience building. And so when we think of the media infrastructure, that's actually the bigger issue right now, and that's going to be a much bigger project changing that, because we need more competing liberal voices out there.
Well, the next question also goes into that, and it says, has the rise of isolation due to the digital age hurt the anti-authoritarian ideas like the ability to rebel and those types of things?
Absolutely, 100%. I think, if you read, not to get too pointy here, but if you read like Hannah Arendt and other philosophers and people who documented the rise of Nazi Germany and other kinds, and Stalinism and other kinds of authoritarian movements in the 20th century, it was very clear that a lot of what was fueling that was, in the early 20th century, there was a lot of disconnection from community that was happening because of economic changes. A lot of people got unmoored from family, church, other community structures that had existed for millennia. And the individualistic, atomized human is very easy to demagogue to, because demagogues create the illusion of community while not actually providing it. And progressive movements thrive in places of collectivism and solidarity with other people and empathy towards other people. So the less you are just connected to your fellow human beings, like the more prone you are to falling down these like right-wing rabbit holes.
Yeah. All right, next question is, why do you think figures like Just Pearly Things and other conservative women take to social media to speak anti-feminist rhetoric with messaging like women shouldn't vote, and what effect does that have on the feminist movement?
I mean, they do it for money, which is like the deep irony of all trad lives, right? They're like, oh yeah, women should stay home and not work for money, but they're working for money. They're often the main source of income for their family, like ballerina farm, like main source of income for her family. I think they're obviously there to be a backlash to feminism. Will it work? I don't know. I've written about this. I don't see in the data that women are buying the message, but I think that it is creating more and more, it's sowing more tensions between men and women and causing divisiveness and, again, turning people against each other so that they're all in their own little silos. And that in and of itself is dangerous, even if we don't see a lot of women convinced by this idea that they should give up their college degree so that they could be a farm wife or something.
I think that's a really great point, especially like with Pearl. Like, I think it just really just supports and gives men way more, or like conservative, that conversation a lot more fuel to the fire. The last question we have from the audience is, do you think that we'd be facing many of the same problems discussed today had Harris won the election?
We'd be facing the same cultural problems. I think that we would be facing the same economic problems. That's for sure. That's for sure. We're in real danger right now. We're in real danger internationally. We're in real danger economically. But it is very important to understand that these underlying cultural tensions that were driving everything that has happened wouldn't go away. They're not going to go away. The only way out is through, and we have to have these hard discussions, and we have to do the work of making our points and not being scared and not being bullied into stepping down because, or giving up, because I think that, yeah, it wasn't that, I'm in my 40s, it wasn't that long ago that things were actually getting better. And I can feel in my bones that there was a lot of improvement over the course of my life. And so I really want people to understand that fighting works, it is worth it, and things can get better, but only if you do the work.
I think I have a follow-up for that personally, is like, it's important to have these discussions, like you said. How do you get more people to kind of take that bait, to be interested in it, to be interested in the opinion pieces that you write and the importance of those arguments, and how do you kind of get them to listen to that when it's so like hermit culture, people are on their phone, like how do you get them to click on those things to educate themselves?
That is my daily battle. I think it's going to be constantly changing. One of the good and bad things about the internet is it causes the way people process information to change all the time and at a really rapid pace. I think that we're in a low point right now for people's attention spans, but I hold out hope that people are going to get sick of the TikTokization of our culture, and I already see signs that a lot of people are feeling like they need to slow down, read more, think more deeply, not just be reactive. And in the meantime, you know, a lot of the work that we do in packaging and trying to like market our work is trying to figure out where people are and meet them where they're at. Like what is turning people on today, and if we can kind of get in that space and then use it to turn their heads towards our views, that's a win, one day at a time.
Well, that's all the questions I have from the audience, so I think maybe if you want to wrap this up.
The one thing that I want to ask you is the frightening amounts of women who did support Trump. And as you said, most went across demographics, especially in light of Dobbs, especially in light of him being adjudicated by a civil court of sexual violence. The judge himself made equivalent to rape, especially in light of the fact that he admitted, and we all heard him say, nobody can grab, and that it's a fortunate thing, which he said under oath. With all those things said, his background as a father, his background as a husband, the Stormy Daniels things, we can go on for 20 minutes on this. In light of all those things, why did so many women vote for him?
I guess the simple answer is a lot of women think complicity will save them. I think that there's been a lot of great writing about this. Don't flinch, because I can just point out that Andrea Dworkin's book, Right Wing Women, just got republished. Andrea was wrong on a lot of stuff, but she was right about this. She argues in the book that a lot of right-wing women recognize that male violence is pervasive, sexism is pervasive, that's just the waters that we're swimming in, and they decide, in my lifetime, that's not going to change, so what I'm going to do is cozy up to it and hope that by playing nice, he'll just hit someone else. And I think that urge is understandable, but it's also wrong, because like we know just in a very basic day-to-day way that when women go along with sexism, it actually gets worse, not better for them. You know, a good example would be a lot of women think that getting married to a misogynist man, you can persuade him to be your protector as opposed to your victimizer. But actually, living with a violent man is the easiest way to get hit or killed. I'm not trying to like be just completely dire about this, but I think that it's really important to understand that complicity does not actually protect you. And we can see this in the way that like right-wing, like Republican women who sidle up with Trump because they're ambitious, often the second they cross him, they're the easiest ones to boot out the door. So but that's a very hard lesson to learn. Everybody wants to think that they're the person who can protect themselves in an unfair system.
With that, I really would like to thank She Speaks, Izzy and Nahida. Amazing job, round of applause, absolutely amazing. I'm not allowed to say this, but look out for this incredible YouTube show that's going to be coming out, starring our speaker doing interviews, so look for that. But thank you so much for coming, and thanks to Bridge as well, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much for coming in and having an insightful discussion on media, feminism, and digital advocacy. Amanda's perspective sheds light on the evolving challenges and opportunities in feminist journalism. Thank you to She Speaks and Bridge TJU for hosting this important conversation. Let's continue pushing for media narratives that amplify women's voices and drive meaningful change. The roundtables are on our YouTube and SoundCloud, and we are broadcasted on the first and third Sundays of each month from 7 to 8 a.m. on G-Town Radio, 92.5 FM WGGT. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.